Episode 88. My wife is so silly. Jade couldn't help but burst into tears when she saw how gently Dario was treating her. She didn't understand why she'd been able to hold back her tears earlier, but when Dario appeared, she couldn't control her tears. She didn't want to show any weakness in front of Bruce, but in front of Dario, it was different. Did this mean that she trusted him? Was that why she showed him her true self without reservation? In the future, if something like this happens, you must call me immediately. Do you understand? After Dario cleaned her face, he looked at her teary eyes with heartache. His deep eyes could not help but soften a little. Yes, I know. Jade leaned against his chest and nodded. She closed her eyes and rested. His embrace was always so warm that she could not leave. She just wanted to lean on him like this for the rest of her life. In the future, if you get hurt, you just wait for me. Let me tell you that your body now belongs to me. Dario gently rubbed her face and gave her a massage. At the same time, he looked at her coldly and warned her. It seemed like he would have to install a surveillance camera, or else he would worry constantly. When did I say, I belong to you? Though she knew he was worried about her, she nonetheless needed to point out that she did not, in fact, belong to Dario. You signed the contract yourself, did you forget? It was written clearly on the contract. The corner of Dario's mouth curled slightly, and he kept moving closer to her lips. You lied to me. Who asked you to be so silly? Dario reached out his finger and scratched her nose. Perhaps he didn't know how troubling this action was in Jade's eyes. Don't call me silly anymore, Jade pouted and seemed to be a little dissatisfied. But Dario disrespected her feelings. He didn't say anything. He did stroke her cheek. Then he kissed her lips. This time, his kiss was very gentle and full of deep affection. Jade fell into the kiss instantly. His soft lips were tightly pressed against hers. Time seemed to have stopped at this moment. She couldn't help but close her eyes and respond to his kiss. After that, the kiss became more intense. There was no telling how long it lasted before Dario reluctantly pulled away. Do you like it? Dario's low and magnetic voice rang in her ears, making her feel dizzy. Jade shyly opened her eyes, meeting his eyes that were very intense. She shrank back and bit her lips, shaking her head. No. She didn't know why, but every time she was with Dario, she seemed to be unable to control her heart. It kept pounding, and her face was always red. Luckily, the cuts on her face would probably hide her blush. Jade wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him on the face. She immediately lowered her head, and her eyes were full of shyness. She was genuinely grateful to him. Not long ago, she'd been so frightened and thought she would die with Bruce. If it hadn't been for Dario's timely appearance, she would have been miserable. However, she didn't know what she could do. She could only give him a simple kiss. When she thought of Bruce, hatred reappeared in her eyes. Her body began to tremble. Dario seemed to have sensed something. He picked her up and pulled her onto his lap. He held her tightly with both hands, and his deep eyes were staring at her. Don't worry. Those who hurt you will not have a good ending. Dario's eyes turned dark and smiled significantly. Wait, what? Jade raised her head and looked into his eyes. She had an indescribable feeling in her heart. Was it peace of mind? Or was it fear? She felt that there were many things about Dario that she didn't know. He was more powerful than she had imagined. Ever since he appeared, Aunt Suzanne had never troubled her again. Therefore, she believed that he truly had the ability to give Bruce a good ending. However, the more he acted like this, the more ashamed she felt. She felt she was insignificant in front of him. Don't go out for the next few days. Stay here. Do you understand? I will stay and take care of you. Dario kissed her forehead. There was a trace of gentleness in his eyes. Mr. Foster, actually, you don't need to do this. Jade had been feeling that she could not take it anymore. Now that she heard him say this, she could not hold back anymore. Her tears would not stop flowing. Who asked you to be my wife? Dario caressed her face with his wide palm. His seemingly helpless words were full of love. Jade was not very happy when she heard this answer. Instead, she was stunned for a moment. She lowered her head and muttered something that Dario didn't understand, as if she was talking to herself. "Is that so? Is it because I am your wife?" "What are you talking about?" Dario frowned slightly. For a moment, he didn't understand her. "Nothing. Thank you, Mr. Foster. You are so good to your wife. You are a good hubby." Jade shook her head with a bitter smile. She seemed very distant. Dario sensed that something was wrong. He wanted to grab her hand, but she dodged it cleverly. "What happened?" Dario emphasized his words. He didn't know what he had said wrong that made her unhappy. "Mr. Foster, I am tired. I want to go to my room." Jade returned to her bedroom in a daze. She even locked the door expressionlessly, as if she wanted to separate herself from the man outside. Dario's face sank. He narrowed his deep eyes and looked at the door. He also heard her lock the door. His expression immediately became difficult to grasp. After Jade walked into the room, she leaned against the door and collapsed on the floor. The cold floor seemed to have brought her back to her senses. She could not help but feel surprised. What was she doing? Why was she angry because of his words? It was because Dario treated her so well, but only because she was his legal wife. He wanted to play the role of a good husband. It was not because he loved her. That was why she was so angry. From the very beginning, this marriage didn't have love. It was just a transaction. So why was she having such a strong reaction? Jade stood up. After all, she was in Dario's house right now. It seemed a little too much for her to be sulking in her room when she locked him outside.